Miami. 1980. The streets are burning. Bodies pile up. And cocaine circulates as if it were common currency. For many, just mentioning the Cuban Mafia conjures the furious face of Tony Montana wielding a rifle in Scarface. Others, better informed, will recall the clans of traffickers who drenched South Florida in blood for an entire decade. But behind the mythology, between reality and oblivion, lies a name that is rarely mentioned. And that name does not belong to fiction. José Miguel Battle. Few know him, but his criminal legacy eclipses that of many legendary mobsters. He was the mastermind behind a secret organization known as La Corporación, an illegal gambling empire that grew to have more than 2,500 active members. They were not mere bettors. It was a well-oiled machine that moved millions of dollars per week, built casinos in Latin America, and forged alliances with the Italian Mafia while exerting unquestionable power over Cuban organized crime. He was not just any gangster. He was the man to whom even drug traffickers had to ask permission to operate. If you want to know the most powerful Cuban gang ever to exist in the United States, you'll have to look to the other side of the law. Because this is not a movie. This is history. José Miguel Battle was born in 1929 inches. Alto Songo, a forgotten town on the map of Cuba. There he attended school, dreamed of a stable future, and at 19 joined the National Police Corps. Barely a year and a half later, he was transferred to Havana. His new role? Investigator in a unit in charge of overseeing gambling operations. But in Cuba at that time, the line between law and crime was practically invisible. The police did not live off their salaries. They lived off contributions from brothels, betting houses, and nightclubs. Those who paid could operate. Those who didn't disappeared. And Battle was no reformer. He did not denounce the system. He understood it, and he mastered it. In just a few years, he went from collecting bribes in dark alleys to handling payments from the most luxurious casino halls, directly linked to the presidential palace of Fulgencio Batista. That privileged access to the most elite circles of Cuban organized crime opened doors that would define his future. José Miguel Battle began to mingle with key figures, and one of his most valuable contacts was Martín Fox, owner of the legendary Tropicana Cabaret. A man of influence, wealth, and deep connections to Havana's underworld. Fox was not only a businessman. He had made his fortune in an illegal business that would shape Battle's career, La Bolita, a form of underground lottery rooted in Cuban popular tradition, which years later would spread across Latino neighborhoods in the United States. It was Fox who introduced him to an even more dangerous figure, Santo Traficante Jr., boss of the Tampa Mafia, and one of the most powerful men in American organized crime. José Miguel became an informant for Traficante. Using his police position, he leaked confidential information taken from the files of other mobsters. That pact, sealed in the shadows, would prove crucial when years later Battle was forced to flee Cuba. His career as a corrupt officer ended abruptly in 1959, when the Cuban Revolution toppled Batista's regime. With the arrival of the new government, gambling was banned, casinos were shut down, and bribes ceased to flow. The once promising gambling investigator was reassigned to the traffic unit, an irrelevant post, without prestige or opportunity. Battle was not willing to live on a miserable salary or give up the lifestyle he had known. That same year, he made the decision that would change his life: to emigrate to the United States. He settled in Union City, New Jersey, a city with a growing community of Cuban exiles. There he bought a small ruined bar and began to rebuild his life from scratch. He wanted to bring his wife and son, but before he could, an unexpected opportunity arose. The CIA was recruiting Cubans for a secret operation to overthrow Fidel Castro's new regime. Thanks to the contacts he had cultivated as a policeman and collaborator with organized crime, José Miguel Battle quickly joined as a volunteer. Within weeks, he was sent to a secret training camp in the mountains of Guatemala. There, preparations were underway for a high-risk mission that would go down in history as a resounding failure, the Bay of Pigs invasion. In April 1961, more than 1,000 Cuban exiles, trained and financed by the CIA, landed on Cuba's southern coast, intending to overthrow Fidel Castro. The operation was poorly coordinated, poorly executed, and ended as one of the most humiliating defeats for the United States in the middle of the Cold War. Although the invasion failed militarily, the episode left a deep mark on many of its participants. In the case of José Miguel Battle, it became his ultimate credential within the exile community, a combat veteran, an unofficial war hero, but admired and respected. The event that cemented that reputation occurred when one of the brigade's units fell into a brutal ambush inland shortly after the landing. One soldier managed to escape and reach Battle's group, and Battle did not hesitate for a second. He mounted an improvised rescue operation. He took the only truck his squad had, a machine gun, sidearms, and with 2 other men, headed toward the front. The terrain was hostile, and the chances of survival were minimal. But against all odds, they reached the combat zone, faced direct enemy fire, and managed to evacuate alive the few survivors who were still resisting. It was a quick, risky, and effective action. It did not change the outcome of the invasion, but for those who witnessed it, it sealed Battle's image as a bold man, steady under pressure, with unbreakable loyalty to his men. But neither courage nor determination was enough. The invasion was a disaster. The brigade was defeated within days, and most of its members were captured by Castro's forces. Battle, along with other prisoners, spent more than a year locked up in Cuban prisons. Only after intense negotiations between John F. Kennedy's administration and Fidel Castro's government was an agreement reached. The combatants would be released in exchange for massive shipments of food, medicine, and agricultural machinery. When they returned to the United States, many of the veterans joined anti-Castro movements. Some swore to dedicate their lives to the downfall of the communist regime. José Miguel Battle, however, chose another path. Although he never abandoned his hatred for the Cuban government, his character was more pragmatic. For him, the main enemy was not only political, it was poverty, and he needed to solve his situation as soon as possible. He received an offer to formally enlist in the U.S. Army. He accepted. He served for about a year. It was a brief stage, but it allowed him to fulfill one of his main goals, finally bringing his wife and son to live with him in the United States. After being discharged, he returned to Union City. The bar he had previously bought was already sold. He had a roof over his head, but no income. It was then that an old connection reappeared with a new proposal. Ángel Mujica, a former colleague in the Havana police and comrade in the Bay of Pigs invasion, offered him a position as partner in a small clandestine operation, the Bolita business, the local version of the Cuban illegal lottery. Battle accepted. At the time, it seemed like nothing more than a modest way to survive. But that simple, almost casual gesture would mark the birth of one of the most structured and lucrative criminal empires ever to emerge among Latino exiles in the United States. Ángel Mujica proposed to José Miguel Battle that they become partners in a small underground betting house. The business revolved around a system well known to Cubans, La Bolita. With no real alternatives and in urgent need of income, Battle accepted his old comrade's offer. Neither of them could have foreseen that this seemingly insignificant step would end up giving rise to one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the continent, La Corporación. But before continuing, a key question must be asked. What exactly is La Bolita? The term comes from the word small ball. Its origin dates back to the early 20th century, linked to the old Cuban national lottery. In that system, numbered balls were placed inside a bag or a drum. From there, one was drawn at random to determine the winning number of the day. The official lottery, however, was not accessible to everyone. In a Cuba marked by inequality, the poorest could not afford to participate in state-run games. That was when the bolitos, street figures who offered smaller-scale bets, appeared. Thus was born a parallel system, clandestine but deeply rooted in Cuban popular culture. Over time, the method of selecting the winning number evolved. It was no longer based solely on official draws. In many cases, results were taken from horse races held at racetracks. Each bolito had its own system. Some offered bets on 100 numbers. Others expanded the range to 500 or even 1,000. The calculation was simple. The greater the number of possible choices, the larger the payout if you won. If someone bet 1 peso on a 500 number draw and won, they received 500 pesos. This possibility of multiplying even minimal amounts quickly attracted the poorest sectors of society. From children to the elderly, from the unemployed to housewives, La Bolita became a social phenomenon, a kind of people's lottery, an entertainment with an innocent appearance that, in the hands of Battle, would become an inexhaustible source of power and money. The key to Bolita's success lay in its accessibility. The minimum bet was as small as the smallest Cuban coin denomination. This made it a real option for anyone, regardless of economic situation. From street vendors to retirees, from workers to elderly women in housecoats, everyone played. In a reality where 1 peso bought practically nothing, betting on the hope of multiplying it by 500 or 1,000 was almost an act of popular logic. La Bolita became the national pastime of the poor. The fascination with the game soon acquired an almost mystical dimension. Foolproof systems for choosing the winning number began to emerge, along with a parallel industry of superstitions. Some based their decisions on dreams and signs. Others relied on small dream interpretation booklets that assigned numbers to symbolic elements. A dream about water could mean number 17. A dead person, 48. A rooster, 7. With the massive arrival of exiles to the United States in the 1962, it wasn't just people who traveled. Their customs came along too. Among them, the fervor for La Bolita. And in the midst of that diaspora, one man understood that there was demand without supply, José Miguel Battle. When he became Mujica's partner in the small betting operation, he found a precarious business with no prospects for growth. But he also saw the potential. The game had a market, cultural identity, and a guaranteed clientele. It only needed organization. To scale the business, 2 elements were essential: money and political protection. On one hand, capital was required to cover large prices. The more bettors there were, the greater the risk of having to pay significant sums to winners. On the other, they needed to ensure that the police would not shut down the venues as soon as the business became visible. Raids were inevitable without strategic contacts within law enforcement and political circles. And that was where Battle's personal history, his ties to the Mafia, and his experience as a former policeman began to make a difference. That was when his past connections started to pay off. Battle got in touch with Santo Traficante Jr., the same Tampa Mafia boss he had worked with years earlier in Cuba. They organized a meeting. In it, Battle coldly laid out his ambitious plan to expand La Bolita into a system of mass betting across Cuban neighborhoods in New York and Union City. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed backing, protection, financial support. He offered Traficante a fixed percentage of the weekly profits. In return, he wanted cover against authorities, logistical assistance, and, above all, help to pay out the large prices that could otherwise bankrupt the operation. Traficante did not give an immediate answer. He promised to consult with the heads of the families involved, and he kept his word. In the following days, José Miguel attended 2 key meetings. The first was with Sam de Cavalcante, leader of the Mafia family in New Jersey. The second, in New York, with Anthony Salerno, representative of the Genovese family. In both, Traficante was present, acting as mediator. The conversations progressed quickly. In little time, the Italian Mafia gave the green light to the agreement. Thus was born an unusual alliance between Cuban exiles and old Italo-American crime clans. La Corporación had been born, a clandestine structure but operated with almost business-like precision. The business began to expand explosively. In a short time, the map of illegal gambling in New York and Union City was dominated by Battle's Bolita network. His former partner, Mujica, was unable to withstand the pressure of growth. He gradually withdrew until he completely abandoned the project. José Miguel, on the other hand, became the mastermind of a massive operation. The structure was clear. At the top, Battle. Below him, the banqueros, responsible for managing entire groups of betting points. Each banquero operated one or more venues and oversaw dozens of people. The first operational level consisted of the runners, who collected bets directly in the street, in bars, shops, or on neighborhood corners. Then there were the clerks, who received the money and recorded the betting combinations in apartments adapted as clandestine processing centers. It was a criminal system, but it worked with the precision of a multinational. The structure of La Corporación was more than a betting network. It was a machine of financial management and territorial control. At the administrative base were the accountants, responsible for keeping detailed records of every transaction. They paid wages, distributed profits, and, most importantly, ensured that bribes to politicians, police officers, and officials reached their destination on time. Above them was the power block. This group was in charge of the organization's internal security. Their task was not just to intimidate or protect. Their function was to operate like a silent, paramilitary force. They eliminated deserters, punished thieves who dared to rob the runners, guarded the offices, and, above all, managed the physical flow of money. From the collection points to the accountants, and then to the so-called safe houses, where millions were stored. The system was as efficient as it was brutal, and also immensely profitable. It is estimated that La Corporación generated more than $50,000 a day in cash. In the 1970s, that figure amounted to a fortune. A large portion of that money ended up in Battle's pockets, but not all of it was net profit. To keep the network running, he had to pay salaries, deliver the promised percentage to the mafia families, and above all, keep key officials satisfied. The chief of police in Union City, Herman Volpe, received regular payments from the organization. His silence was a shield against raids and operations. There was also William Musto, the city's mayor, who, according to various judicial sources, was a direct beneficiary of the dirty money. With this support, Battle not only consolidated his empire, he became an influential figure in local politics. He backed candidacies, supported campaigns, and helped place several people in key positions in municipal government. Union City was not only his base of operations, it was his stronghold. But not even such a solid protection network could keep him off the radar forever. When the business grew so much that it became impossible to ignore, federal authorities began to move. As the operation expanded, it was impossible not to notice it. What had begun as a clandestine network now manifested openly in the Latino neighborhoods of New York and New Jersey. The betting, the runners, the flow of money, everything was in plain sight. The FBI opened an investigation into José Miguel Battle and his organization. For 4 years, federal agents collected evidence, intercepted communications, followed key members, and mapped out the entire structure of La Corporación. Finally, in 1970, the case was presented to the prosecutor's office. The trial began in July of that year. 14 people, including Battle, were formally charged with conspiring to operate a large-scale illegal betting system. José Miguel was arrested but released on bail. Instead of staying to face trial, he made a risky decision. He fled to Spain. It is difficult to know what motivated that decision. Perhaps he thought he would be safer, far from the reach of US justice. Perhaps he underestimated the seriousness of the case. But his stay in Europe was brief. A few months later, he voluntarily returned to the United States. That action, far from benefiting him, added a new charge: bail jumping, which legally made him a fugitive. Even so, luck seemed to remain on his side. The RICO Act, a legal tool that would have allowed prosecutors to charge him as the leader of a criminal organization, was not enacted until months after the charges had been filed. That difference in timing saved him from a much harsher sentence. Instead of facing decades in prison, Battle was exposed only to a reduced sentence. Thanks to the work of his lawyers and a strategically negotiated plea deal, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. An incredibly light sentence, considering the magnitude of his network. But while he was serving that sentence, calm on the streets began to break. Inside La Corporación, tensions were brewing that would soon turn into bloodshed. Battle had imposed a clear line: no drugs. For him, La Bolita was profitable, culturally accepted, and carried relatively low legal risks. Cocaine trafficking, on the other hand, was volatile, violent, and capable of destroying everything that had been built. But not everyone agreed. His own brothers, Gustavo and Pedro, operated out of Miami and were already involved in drug trafficking. Their decision to ignore José Miguel's orders not only challenged his leadership, it also set in motion a chain of events that would stain the Cuban underworld red. The first to fall was Gustavo Battle, who ended up in prison for drug-related crimes. His brother Pedro, instead of stopping, moved to New York. There, in secret and without José Miguel's knowledge, he continued cocaine operations, but this time, he was not alone. He was accompanied by a young member of the organization, known by his nickname Ernestico. And to understand what would come next, it is necessary to pause and look at him. Ernestico was barely a young man when he met Battle. The meeting took place in Spain, during the brief period when José Miguel had fled there after his first indictment in the United States. The introduction came through mutual acquaintances. Battle, already called El Padrino by his men, saw in him the ideal potential to mold a loyal soldier. He was young, ambitious, fearless. A perfect profile for tasks that require cold blood and absolute obedience. He was immediately integrated into La Corporación. In Spain, under Battle's direct tutelage, Ernestico committed his first murder, a baptism of fire that would tie him definitively to the darkest circles of the organization. When José Miguel returned to New York, Ernestico went with him. There, he quickly connected with Pedro, the rebellious brother. They shared ambition, lack of scruples, and a more aggressive vision of the business. While Battle insisted on keeping La Bolita as the core of La Corporación, they plunged headfirst into drug trafficking. And at first, everything seemed to work. They sold cocaine, made money, and faced no significant competition. But that balance would soon be broken with the arrival of an old enemy, Palulu, a Cuban gangster with history. Palulu, who had already clashed with the Battle brothers in Miami, moved to New York and set up his operation just a few blocks from Pedro's territory. Tensions quickly resurfaced. The spark was lit when Palulu's men began selling drugs in the area controlled by Pedro. The response was brutal. Ernestico killed them and seized merchandise worth $20,000. This incident occurred just as José Miguel Battle was about to be released from prison. When he found out, his reaction was absolute fury. Not only had he lost control over his brothers, but now his orders were being openly defied. For him, this kind of act was not just a lack of discipline. It was a direct threat to the model he had built with precision over years. And he knew from experience what that path meant. Years earlier, in Miami, he and Pedro had nearly died in a similar conflict. José Miguel Battle did not hesitate. He ordered Pedro to immediately abandon the drug business and keep a low profile. No more cocaine. No more provocations. No more risks. Pedro, at least on the surface, complied with the instruction. He stopped trafficking, but he couldn't resist the nightlife, and it was precisely that weakness that led him to his death. One night, while drinking in a bar, he came face to face with Palulu. The encounter did not end in words. A violent shootout ensued. Pedro Battle was killed. The news shattered José Miguel emotionally. the pain of losing his brother mixed with a burning need for revenge. Battle was not a man who forgave, and the idea that Palulu, an old rival, now doubly an enemy, had killed a member of his blood consumed him. The problem was that Palulu was not only dangerous, he was incredibly elusive. He had already survived several confrontations. But that did not stop the Godfather. He launched a retaliation operation. He assigned the mission to his two best men, Ernestico and Chino Acuña, elite hitmen of La Corporación. For months, they tracked Palulu across the country. They interrogated and tortured his associates, eliminated anyone who might be connected. Dozens of bodies were left along the way. It was a relentless manhunt. Finally, they identified a pattern in the target's movements. Palulu usually met his associates on certain days in a park. They prepared the ambush, but Palulu saw them coming. He fled immediately. In the middle of the chase, the hitmen managed to shoot him. The bullets struck his legs. He was rushed to a hospital. The severity of the injuries forced doctors to amputate one of his legs. The revenge was not completed, and, to Battle's frustration, Palulu not only survived, but shortly afterward was arrested for Pedro's murder. He ended up in prison, where far from being safe, he became a permanent target. Battle tried to have him killed again and again, but Fate, or perhaps sheer luck, seemed to keep protecting his brother's killer. Meanwhile, another problem was quietly brewing inside his own organization, one that would threaten La Corporación's stability from within. Since Pedro's death, Ernestico had begun to unravel. The young hitman, once protected and admired by Battle, was starting to lose control. He had been forbidden from engaging in drug trafficking, and the money he earned as a hired killer was no longer enough. Ambition consumed him. He then launched a constant campaign of pressure on the Godfather, demanding promotion to banquero, a position of power within the structure of La Corporación. Eventually, Battle gave in. But it was a mistake. Ernestico lacked the skills for that role. Managing betting points was not his strength. He had no grasp of finance, logistics, or discipline. His management only generated losses, and when the numbers began to speak for themselves, José Miguel dismissed him. Wounded in his pride, Ernestico decided to break ranks. He used his reputation as a hitman to borrow large sums from other banqueros. He promised returns, protection, favors, but he never repaid the money, until he came across one who simply said, no. It was then that Ernestico conceived a desperate idea: to kidnap that banquero and demand ransom from the organization. The plan was a disaster. Ernestico tried to eliminate him to settle the matter but failed. The news spread immediately. The betrayal could not be ignored. The banqueros, nervous and afraid, organized a meeting with Battle. Although many of them knew that Ernestico was considered almost like a son by the Godfather, this time they dared to speak. They all agreed he had to die. Battle listened, in silence, and nodded. The first assassination attempt took place in New York. It failed. Ernestico managed to escape. He fled to Miami. There they tried again. He was shot twice more, but they also failed. The most serious wound was to his forearm. Battle realized he could not leave the matter in the hands of others. He personally traveled to Miami, accompanied by the corporation's top hitmen. With the help of local contacts, they located Ernestico's hideout. José Miguel led the attack. He entered the apartment with his men, armed, and it was he himself who fired between the eyes of the young men he had once considered family. The strike was clean, direct, definitive, or so it seemed. But Ernestico was not alone in the apartment. His girlfriend, Idalia Fernandez, was with him. Incredibly, she survived. The police found her gravely wounded, lying in a pool of blood, and immediately rushed her to the hospital. Against all odds, she recovered. And what she did next would change the fate of the Godfather. Idalia became the first key witness to the assassination attempt. Shortly afterward, a second appeared. Charlie Hernandez, Ernestico's close friend, also involved in robberies of the corporation's banqueros. He knew he would be the next target. Out of fear, revenge, or simple survival instinct, Charlie decided to talk. He revealed every detail of the attack, how it was planned, who took part, and who ordered it. He named José Miguel Battle as the mastermind behind the crime. For her part, Idalia identified one of the attackers, Chino Acuña, one of the corporation's deadliest hitmen. She did not dare to mention Battle directly, but her silence was as revealing as any testimony. The investigation advanced quickly. More witnesses appeared, people close to the organization who, in an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty, confirmed the initial accounts. Some even provided details proving Battle's personal presence at the crime scene. With that body of evidence, the case was closed. José Miguel Battle was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Everything pointed to that being the end of his story, a definitive downfall, even before reaching the highest point of his power. But once again, the system revealed its cracks. Battle's lawyers found a technical weakness in the wording of the verdict. The indictment stated that the defendant conspired with Chino Acuña or other unknown persons. That ambiguity opened the door to an appeal. The legal language, vague and imprecise, worked in favor of the accused. The defense then approached the prosecution with a proposal. They would drop the direct murder charge if José Miguel pleaded guilty to having ordered the crime. The prosecutors agreed. What they didn't know was that Battle had another ace up his sleeve, a favorable judge, one who at the moment of sentencing chose the unexpected. Instead of confirming 30 years in prison, he granted him probation. Although the Godfather walked free, something in him changed forever. It was not a lesson in humility. It was a reaffirmation of his power. He had committed a murder he himself had pulled the trigger, and yet the system could not hold him. La Bolita continued to generate torrents of money. Local politicians were on his payroll. The police either respected or feared him. And the justice system simply failed to set boundaries. For Battle, all this was not luck. It was proof that the world could be molded to his convenience. And that distorted vision led him to become something more dangerous than an ordinary capo, a crime boss convinced of his own impunity. Soon, the entire organization would feel the consequences. During the more than 2 years he spent in prison, while the trial for Ernestico's murder was being resolved, the corporation did not collapse. On the contrary, it continued operating with discipline and efficiency. Leadership was assumed by his son, Miguelito Battle, and by a unique figure within the Cuban Mafia environment, Abraham Reitz, the only Jewish banquero in the organization. Reitz was not a newcomer. He had known José Miguel in Havana. They were old friends. He was the one who had introduced Battle to the more technical aspects of the Bolita business years earlier. Abraham not only had experience but also financial intelligence. He understood structures, opaque accounting, how to move money without leaving traces. When Battle was imprisoned, many within the corporation asked Reitz to collaborate with Miguelito to maintain stability. Despite nearly 20 years of age difference between them, Miguelito and Reitz understood each other perfectly. And together they devised a new plan to take the corporation off the streets and move it into the legal world. During that period, a network of legitimate businesses was consolidated in strategic sectors such as retail, trade, and the textile industry. But, as would later become clear, legality does not always mean cleanliness. The legal companies became the epicenter of the new scheme. There, the dirty money from La Bolita was transformed into legal income. The system operated with a sophisticated design. The cash generated from betting was funneled into shell companies registered in Panama or in some Caribbean islands. These companies lent money to the legitimate businesses controlled by Miguelito Battle and Abraham Reitz in the United States. Then, that capital, already laundered through simulated invoicing, emerged on the other end as completely legal income. The supposed debts to the foreign companies existed only on paper. No one expected actual payment. The financial model was effective. But while the books looked healthy, the streets told a different story. The corporation's authority had weakened. The runners were assaulted more frequently. some members betrayed the organization or disappeared with stolen money. And Miguelito, far from acting firmly, chose to look the other way. The situation worsened when one of the high-ranking banqueros, known as Ileño Dávila, decided to go independent. He broke ties with the corporation and began operating under the protection of the Lucchese family, one of the most powerful within the Italian-American Mafia. Shortly afterward, his new organization was named La Compañía, and in less than a year, it became a second force in the Cuban underworld of New York. When José Miguel Battle was released from prison, he found a scenario he did not like at all. The laundering system was functioning. The finances were solid, but his reputation was eroded. In the streets, the corporation no longer inspired the same fear as before. For him, that was intolerable. He decided to take drastic measures. First, restore the image of absolute authority. Then, eliminate any internal or external threat. During that period, former members of the organization, including Ernestico's circle, were assassinated. It was not just a purge. Respect had to return, even if it meant piling up corpses. To achieve this, he appointed the hitman Conrado Lalo Ponce as the operational head of a new enforcement group. His task was clear: restore control with blood. And during the first 3 years of that group's existence, at least several dozen people were executed. Anyone who had stolen, betrayed, or even disobeyed paid with their life. And those who did not understand the warning followed the same path. Power intoxicates. And José Miguel Battle had it all. It was the 1980. For more than 20 years, his organization had been generating millions of dollars with almost mathematical regularity. The corporation already had over 2,000 members. It had officials, police officers, bankers, politicians, all under his control. With a single phone call, he could mobilize hitmen to eliminate any obstacle. But absolute power has an inevitable consequence: unbridled ambition. For many criminal leaders, that ambition is divided between economic greed and the desire for total control. In Battle's case, the priority was power. He wanted blind obedience, authority without limits. And the more time passed, the less tolerance he showed for any form of defiance. Even those who had been fundamental to his rise were no longer safe. The most symbolic example was the case of Ángel Mujica, his old friend and original partner in the bolita business. Mujica had retired in the late 1982. He sold his betting outlets for a considerable sum, nearly $500,000, and moved to Spain with the intention of starting a new life in the legal world. But his plans failed. He lost all his capital in failed businesses and, with few options left, returned to New York. There, he decided to open a small betting point on his own. He knew he was operating on Battle's territory. So, out of respect, he asked the Godfather directly for permission. The meeting was cordial. José Miguel, smiling, told him there was no problem, that he could accept bets and make a living. But as soon as Mujica walked out the door, Battle gave the order to kill him. For him, the act of opening a betting outlet before asking for authorization was an insult, an affront to his authority, and no one, not even an old friend, had the right to defy him, even unintentionally. Ángel Mujica was murdered shortly afterward. Like so many others, he became a victim of the Godfather's transformation into a figure who no longer recognized loyalty, only absolute control. For José Miguel Battle, Ángel Mujica's mistake was not opening a business without his permission. It was doing so before asking for it. That nuance, insignificant to others, he interpreted as an act of defiance. And in his world, defiance was paid for with life. Mujica was just one more. At least 5 other people who had been by his side in the early years of the corporation, friends, partners, collaborators, suffered the same fate. They all believed their shared history gave them the right to some leniency. Battle thought differently. Any gesture that questioned his authority had to be eliminated. But his desire for control was not limited to the organization. It also extended outward. In New York, the corporation shared territory with several criminal groups, On one side, La Compañía, led by Ileño Dávila. On the other, La Cosa Nostra, the Italian Mafia, which operated its own version of the numbers game, similar to La Bolita. To avoid unnecessary wars, a tacit agreement was established between the parties. No organization could open a betting point within a certain radius of another group. It was a kind of non-aggression pact, respected with almost military precision. For years, the pact worked, but in 1982, everything changed. The police shut down one of the betting outlets operated by La Compañía. Technically, the area was free. The corporation, invoking the rules, opened its own betting point in that same location, but Dávila did not see it that way. He claimed that although the outlet had been closed, his organization had not lost the right to the territory. In response, he reopened his venue in exactly the same place. What had once been a tense but stable coexistence turned into open conflict. And as would soon become clear, neither side was willing to back down. The result was inevitable. Two betting houses, one belonging to the Corporación and the other to La Compañía, operating side by side. A powder keg about to explode. A meeting was called to avoid a greater confrontation. José Miguel Battle and Ileño Dávila participated, and at least on the surface, they managed to reach a temporary agreement. But the truce did not last. Almost immediately, one of La Compañía's betting outlets was consumed by fire. In its place, a Corporación betting point appeared. Dávila's response was identical. He set fire to one of Battle's outlets and reopened his own in the same neighborhood. The conflict was officially declared. A new meeting was organized, this time with the participation of the Lujese family, who backed Dávila, and the Genovese family, historically allied with Battle. The tension in the air was palpable. Finally, in 1983, representatives of the four groups, Genovese, Lucchese, the Corporación, and La Compañía, sat at the same table. It was a desperate attempt to avoid an open war. But none of the meetings had any effect. Shortly after the last encounter, a member of the Corporación was murdered. The perpetrators were identified as hitmen and while the Cubans tried to maintain appearances, the Lucchese quietly continued occupying Battle's territory. The situation became unsustainable. The accumulated tensions, the broken agreements, and the constant provocations triggered a new stage of violence. An undeclared war between mafias began. The main weapon, fire. Between 1983 and 1985, more than 60 illegal betting outlets were set ablaze in New York. The pattern was clear. Corporación outlets burned one night, and La Compañía as the next. The violence was not limited to property. The conflict left a trail of deaths, including at least 8 civilians, collateral victims of a war between criminal clans that recognized no limits. And Battle, far from retreating, was not afraid to directly challenge the Cosa Nostra. The arson attacks became routine. More than 60 illegal betting outlets burned over a 2-year period. The flames were the language of the conflict, until the unthinkable happened. In one of the fires, a little girl was seriously injured. The incident shocked the community. It was no longer about score settling between mobsters. The violence had reached innocence. From then on, the flames ceased. It is not known whether there was a peace agreement or whether fear of public and police backlash forced the truce. But the war stopped, at least temporarily. By that time, José Miguel Battle had already changed his stage. He moved to Miami and built a kind of private ranch, about 9 hectares, on the outskirts of the city. The man who had once been the terror of New York was now playing the role of farmer. He hired workers to cultivate the land and raise fighting roosters. He strolled across the grounds as if returning to his childhood in the Cuban countryside. But it was not retirement, it was strategy. At the same time, Battle began to clash with a key figure in the illegal gambling world of South Florida. Oscar Álvarez, the main bolita operator in the region. Battle believed that, as the new boss in the city, local banqueros should pay him tribute, a percentage for operating in his territory. Álvarez and his men disagreed. The Godfather's response was immediate. He attacked Alvarez's organization, attempting to assassinate his right-hand man, Gerardo Sled. Alvarez's reaction, however, was unexpected. There were no reprisals. There was no war. He simply shut down his business and left Miami. The message was clear. No one was willing to challenge Battle's power. Most of the local banqueros defected and joined the corporation. But that was not the Godfather's only victory during that period. There was still an outstanding matter that tormented him. An enemy who, against all logic, remained alive. A man who had demonstrated an almost miraculous ability to escape death. The murderer of his brother Pedro. What happened next might seem like the script of a black comedy, but it was real. Life, at times, surpasses any fiction. Palulu, the killer of Pedro Battle, had accomplished the impossible, surviving again and again through multiple assassination attempts. After his first clash with the Corporación, José Miguel put a price on his head. $1,000 in reward, a modest sum, but enough to attract opportunists. In prison, Palulu was stabbed in the back, but again, he survived. After the attack, he was transferred to a high-security section. He spent the rest of his sentence surrounded by inmates, whose crimes made them fear for their own lives. Ironically, that kept him safe. Once released, a new attempt happened almost immediately. A hitman, motivated by the reward, spotted him in the street. A shootout followed. Palulu was shot in the chest, and he survived again. Paradoxically, he ended up back in prison, this time for illegal possession of a firearm. 2 years later, upon release, he again crossed paths with bounty hunters. More gunfire, and again, he came out unharmed. He was arrested once more. Another sentence. When he finally returned to New York, José Miguel Battle decided enough was enough. He entrusted the job to his trusted enforcer, Lalo Ponce. The plan was meticulous. Lalo hid in the lobby of Palulu's building. He waited for the exact moment. When he saw him walk by, he stepped out of hiding and fired point blank. The bullet hit the nape of his neck, but once again, Palulu survived. The bullet entered the skull, but did not touch the brain. The incredulity was total. The street was already calling him the Immortal. And for the Corporación, that was a serious problem. If a man could survive so many assassination attempts, then fear, their main tool of control, was beginning to fade. Battle could not allow it. This time, he took control personally. He gathered his best hitmen. They located Palulu. They kidnapped him and riddled him with bullets. 11 shots. Legs, torso, shoulders. It seemed impossible that he could live. But he lived. Again. He spent several days in a coma after an extreme surgical operation. But he pulled through. And then the legend became a real problem. The streets were already whispering that Palulu was invincible, and that directly damaged the Corporation's reputation. Battle understood that violence alone was not enough. The story had to be closed. He sent an assassin to the hospital, where Palulu was recovering. The killer entered his room and fired several times. 2 bullets to the heart, 2 to the head. This time, there was no miracle. Pedro Battle was finally avenged. The death of Palulu was celebrated as a personal victory. José Miguel Battle organized a party in Miami that lasted almost a week. There was excess alcohol, women, music, and an atmosphere of artificial euphoria. Battle and his men toasted to Pedro's memory, convinced that his soul could finally rest. But outside of that excessive celebration, the reality was different. The Godfather was tense, paranoid, and increasingly isolated. His move to Miami had not been a simple relocation. He had left the Corporación in the hands of his brother-in-law, Nene Marquez, in an attempt to step away from daily pressure. In his South Florida mansion, Battle immersed himself in drugs, luxury, and retirement fantasies, while in New York, the war with the Italian Mafia intensified. The arsons, murders, and score settling among Cuban criminals could no longer be ignored by the authorities. La Bolita, which for years had operated in the shadows, had become far too visible. And José Miguel Battle was the most recognizable face of Cuban crime in the United States. The supposed retirement in Miami fooled no one. After the attack on Oscar Alvarez and his organization, informants alerted the federal government that Battle was still active. The message was clear. His attempt to get off the radar had failed. He needed to disappear once again. It was then that a new plan arose: to open a casino in Peru. It all began with a proposal that came through a trusted contact, a man named De Villers. Peruvian businessmen had assured him that they could secure political permits to open a casino in the capital. They did not have the capital, but they had the necessary connections to operate with impunity. In exchange, they only asked for a minor stake in the property. De Villers passed the proposal to Battle, who accepted without hesitation. José Miguel Battle accepted the proposal enthusiastically. It was, in theory, the perfect opportunity to distance himself from the pressure in the United States, move money under a legal guise, and maintain a low profile while the situation cooled down. There was only one problem. He had never managed a casino. At first glance, that should not have been an obstacle. Hiring experts, delegating functions, and letting the business run itself was, in theory, simple. And so it began. Battle hired skilled professionals, offered them generous salaries, and gave the general manager a percentage of the profits. At the beginning, it worked. The team they built was solid, and the casino had an immediate impact. It was a success. Until then, nothing like it had existed in Peru. But the good start did not last. Soon competitors began to emerge. And when Battle arrived personally in the country, everything collapsed. The supposed international businessman arrived as a caricature of himself: cocaine, alcohol, whims, threats, disorder. Battle behaved like a despot out of control, like a medieval nobleman in his private castle. He was permanently high or drunk. He insulted staff. He harassed female employees. He made death threats over any disagreement. To make matters worse, his new romantic partner began interfering in administrative decisions. Her judgment was erratic, and her orders clashed with those of the manager. Then came the relatives. Battle began appointing family members to positions in the casino, replacing experienced employees. The first to leave was the general manager, then the head of security, who made the mistake of warning him that using cocaine under the surveillance cameras was not a good idea. Battle accused him of invading his privacy and threatened to kill him. From then on, everything unraveled. Employees began resigning en masse. The casino's reputation deteriorated. No one wanted to work under such erratic and dangerous leadership. What had begun as a strategic investment soon turned into a pathetic spectacle of self-destruction. The decline was inevitable. Clients wanted to gamble in a professional, safe environment with competent staff. But that was impossible with an owner like Battle. Finally, the general manager, tired of threats and arbitrariness, sued José Miguel over a dispute related to his severance pay. Battle refused to pay. He responded as he usually did, with death threats. That conflict was the trigger for an investigation. And soon after, the authorities discovered that Battle was residing in Peru with a false passport. It was enough to order his immediate deportation to the United States. The casino survived a little longer, but without leadership or qualified staff, it eventually closed due to losses. For U.S. authorities, Battle's return was an unexpected gift. From the moment he left the country for Peru with falsified documents, he had vanished from their radar. Had he not drawn attention with his erratic behavior, he might have lived quietly abroad, managing his empire from the shadows. But now he was back, and the margin for error was minimal. The FBI had spent years trying to catch him, and now they once again had direct access to him. Several times they came close. One instance was in a murder-for-hire case. They intercepted a call from one of his subordinates, who was planning a hit on a specific target. The idea was to wait until, once the crime was committed, That subordinate would report directly to Battle. José Miguel's phone was tapped. It was only a matter of time. But the plan collapsed. Battle mysteriously found out about the wiretap and cut off all sensitive conversations by phone. It was not the only time. The same pattern repeated in other operations. Whenever the net closed in, Battle disappeared just in time. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. He had an informant inside the investigation team. The other strategy used by the authorities was to look for cracks in his circle. With every police raid, someone from the corporation ended up in prison. The objective: pressure them into talking. But no one talked. Nobody cooperated. José Miguel Battle knew how to maintain his men's loyalty, even behind bars. While they were in prison, their families received regular money, and they themselves also received constant deposits in their prison accounts, paid lawyers, and covered visits. It was a carefully financed system of silence. The same occurred with the Bolita bankers. From time to time, one of them was arrested for illegal gambling, money laundering, or tax evasion. Some even pleaded guilty. But no one ever mentioned Battle. Never. Everyone knew the story of Idalia Fernández, the young witness in the Ernestico case. She survived the assassination attempt, and sometime later, she was found dead in her apartment. The message was clear: whoever broke the code paid with their life. That is why, when José Miguel was deported from Peru for using a false passport, federal authorities understood they could not let the opportunity slip by. Document forgery is a federal crime, and although minor compared to the crimes he had committed for decades, it was enough to detain him without needing internal cooperation. A few months passed between paperwork, bureaucracy, and surveillance. But finally, the police obtained an arrest warrant and another to raid his mansion in Miami. What they found inside not only confirmed his dangerousness: a loaded shotgun, an unregistered pistol, and something more: documents and evidence linking him to radical anti-Castro exile groups, which he had allegedly financed in secret. This last point did not add much from a legal standpoint, but it demonstrated that, despite everything, José Miguel Battle had never stopped fighting his personal war against the Cuban regime. That evidence of his anti-Castro ties did not influence his legal fate, but it confirmed an undeniable fact: Battle never accepted the loss of his country. On the charge of passport forgery, his lawyers secured a favorable deal. He pled guilty and received a suspended sentence. But he was not so lucky with the charge of illegal possession of firearms. The case went to trial, and José Miguel Battle was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He was released in March 1999. At first glance, Battle no longer seemed like a threat. He was a 70-year-old man, frail, with health problems. He walked more slowly, spoke in a weaker voice, but appearances can be deceiving. Within the corporation, he remained an unquestionable figure. For the younger members, he was a living legend. The man who built a criminal empire from scratch, who generated millions of dollars a week for decades, and who never spent more than 10 years in prison. He was admired, feared, and obeyed. But the myth could not last forever. In 2005, José Miguel Battle was arrested again. This time, the case was different. Authorities directly linked him to a conspiracy under the RICO law, the same legal tool that had nearly caught him decades earlier. The accusation was clear. The corporation was still operating, and Battle was involved in a series of arson attacks on illegal lottery outlets. The prosecution did not come alone. They had strong witnesses. One of them was Vincent Cafaro, a former intermediary between the corporation and the Genovese family. Cafaro had worked directly with Tony Salerno, one of the most influential bosses of the Italian Mafia officera. Cafaro testified that Battle not only participated in the operations, but was at the center of an illegal gambling network generating millions in revenue. The net was finally tightening around the Godfather. Authorities also had Robert Hopkins, the link between La Compañía and the Lucchese family. His testimony confirmed what Vincent Cafaro had said. And that was not all. Investigators had gathered money laundering evidence directly implicating members of the organization and revealed the system through which Miguelito Battle and Abraham Wrights funneled bolita money into legitimate businesses. Even casinos seemingly legal were used to launder cash sent from the United States. In 2006, more than 20 people were prosecuted in the case, including José Miguel Battle. Only 9 went to trial. Several defendants pled guilty in advance. Others chose to cooperate with the prosecution, joining the ranks of protected witnesses. The trial lasted 6 months. José Miguel Battle, the godfather, ended up pleading guilty after 2 months of proceedings. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. His son, Miguelito, received 15 years. Abraham Wrights, the financial mastermind of the operation, tried to gain leniency by becoming a witness, but he received no benefit for his cooperation. He was sentenced to 15 years and, overwhelmed by the fall, took his own life in prison. Battle, for his part, would not serve his entire sentence. His health had deteriorated severely. The authorities authorized him to receive treatment in a hospital in Colombia. There he spent his final years, diagnosed with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, liver cirrhosis, hepatitis B, and renal and hepatic failure. He died in August 2007. With his death and the imprisonment of his closest men, the corporation collapsed. To this day, there is no evidence that it continues to exist as a significant force in organized crime in the United States. And that concludes today's video. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the true story of José Miguel Battle and the Corporación, the most powerful Cuban criminal organization ever to operate on US soil. If you found this case interesting, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so you don't miss upcoming content, and share this video with those who enjoy real stories of organized crime. See you in the next documentary.